Whenever a Formula car debuts in Gran Turismo, it's always a huge deal, and it's not hard to see why. They are the top tier of motorsport in many people's book, at least on par with Le Mans and Pikes Peak, many people would say even higher, but also that can be a double-edged sword, because when you bring a car as legendary as this, or Senna's Lotus, which debuted in GT6, which for licensing reasons they now call the F1500 without the livery, there's a huge burden on the car's shoulder. In fact, it kind of harkens back to a car I talked about in the real world a couple of days ago, the Jaguar XF-RS review that I did. My expectations were much higher on that car because I already knew how good an XFR could be. That can work against a car though. When you expect more of it, you can be more easily disappointed. And when you put the names Senna and McLaren onto a car, you can't really get much higher expectations than that. In fact, to address the elephant in the room of the thumbnail and the livery that I'm using, which some of you will have already commented about, even my girl wasn't on board for this. I told her that I wanted to put a Williams livery or maybe a Benetton B186 livery. She's a huge Senna fan, a huge McLaren fan, so she wasn't entirely on board with that concept, but that's the whole point of the livery editor, and I like to change it up. Plus, that kind of evil part of me loves to mess with people who do love the McLaren and the McLaren colours, as iconic as they are. Now, I will say straight off the bat, I like this car personally more than the Lotus, more than the F1500 TA. There's just something about it which feels that little bit more cutting edge compared to that vehicle. Now, with that being said, I will still give the car some leeway, cut it some slack for being an older Grand Prix car. 1988 was a long time ago in motorsport. A decade ago was a long time ago. So to even still be competitive or fast in any sense against a more modern machine is a big deal. With that being said, the games have become more harsh on how a Formula car can feel. You know, in an older racing game, if you had a Formula car, nothing could touch it. Whereas now, you get yourself a nice prototype, you know, Porsche 919 or something, you could probably give this car a good run for its money, if not destroy it on certain circuits. So what's this car like to drive? Well, as I touched on in my review of the whole update, 8 million credits is the price that you're paying at the moment, at least in the Hagerty Legendary dealer. That will probably go up or down in future, but that's the price for now. For that, you get a 1.5 litre turbo engine, of course mid-mounted, rear-wheel drive, 675 horsepower. You cannot adjust that upward, so that is the limit. Kind of a shame. I was hoping maybe some crazy qualifying power might be in order, like some of these older cars had, but no, that's not the case here. The weight is low, of course, 540 kilos, and the performance points obviously are up around the 900 region. It comes with medium tyres as standard and sits at 895 points. If you put those up to, say, softs, essentially qualifying tyres, you can get it over 900. If you put the race transmission on, it takes it well over 900, and we'll get to the transmission again in a second. So in terms of tuning, it's a bit of a middle ground. In terms of upgrading the engine and the weight itself, you can't do anything. Well, specs, you can definitely change. Transmission, suspension, downforce, all that kind of good stuff. And with a Formula car, something that does have an inherent level of customizability, of course you'd want to be able to do that, and you can here. What's it like to drive them? Well, the turbo lag is definitely there. I will say you can learn very quickly how to counteract that turbo lag, accelerating, I would say, just maybe half a second earlier, maybe even a second earlier than you actually need to, and then just as it spools up, maybe back off the throttle just a touch to prevent that tail end from kicking out. And incidentally, for those who'd like to see this car without any commentary, as I know some people do like to, earlier on today I put out a raw gameplay version with the original livery at Spa, where you can see the car just driving on its own. Now, in that video and in this one, you can see the kind of approach that I take to driving, much smoother than a modern machine. You know, you take something like that Mercedes or the Formula Gran Turismo out, you can plow through corners in those cars. This one and the Lotus, now the F1500 TA, you have to reconfigure your approach. They have much more understeer. Entering a corner, midway through, then they are much easier to break loose out of a corner because of that turbo lag, and when it finally kicks in, you have to have a totally different approach to that. Some will already know that. If you've already driven the Lotus, the F1500, you will be more familiar. You'll already have a leg up on driving this car, but if you're new to the style, maybe you haven't even driven a Formula car in Gran Turismo before, I can actually see you maybe needing to really lower your expectations or you might be disappointed, because this doesn't feel as ballistic as you might expect. The power is not crazy, it's certainly more than good enough at only half a metric ton, but it's not like a modern LMP car, it's certainly not like a Tomahawk or a Red Bull. It feels its age, as it should. Now, in terms of whether or not you should buy the car, I think that's kind of a self-explanatory question in the case of this one. If you're not bothered by the car, if you don't really care for Formula cars, then absolutely you can save the 8 million, buy multiple other cars instead, even something like 2 or 3 different prototype class cars you might get more use of than this, or more use out of. If you are an F1 fan, if you're a McLaren fan, if you're a Senna fan, if you're just a car collecting fan, well, all of those, of course, if you haven't already bought it by the time I'm even talking about the car, well, it goes without saying you're probably going to. So this video is more so about what I would recommend having your expectations set at, rather than whether or not you should buy it. If you have the right expectations, I don't think you'll be disappointed, just don't expect it to be the most ballistic thing around. I will say though, for its power and with the standard transmission at least, the top end speed is quite good. With the downforce set modestly, untouched in other words, I haven't done anything to the car driving it here in the video, it can top out around, 205, 206-ish miles per hour, maybe a fraction higher. That's not bad, and of course that's bouncing off the red line at that point, but still, for that kind of power in a stock setup, that's quite good, which indicates it could be pretty damn good once you stretch those gears out a bit more and lower the downforce. Most of the time Formula cars can't compete with prototypes for top end speed, but if there's ever a Gran Turismo game where they are closer than ever, it is this one, because prototypes are nowhere near as dominatingly fast as they were, even in the last game, in comparison, so that gap really has closed. Ultimately, it's a fantastic collector's piece, of course. It's a car which I have no doubt so many people are happy to see here, and thankfully we can edit it in terms of liveries, of course, you can see that, which means that the creativity is endless. I will say, an interesting thing about the car is how much effort they put into rendering that little dangling cable in the car, that little bunch of cables that swings around with the G-force of the corner. I swear they put more effort into that than half of the other features in the game, which, I mean, take that as you will. But overall, that's it for my thoughts on the car. Of course, stick around on the channel for more. Check out the gameplay video if you haven't seen it already. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.